Hi, I'm Dee Good, and I'm here today with Andrew Holecek, who's going to be leading another wonderful program at Drala Mountain Center this summer on death and the art of dying, the Luminous Bardo of Dharmata. Welcome, Andrew.
Hey Dee, nice to see you again. Thanks for having me.
So, what is the Dharmata? Am I saying that correctly?
You are saying it correctly. Yeah, it's a Sanskrit word that tries to translate the untranslatable. So dharmata clumsily translated as like isness, suchness, thatness, and fundamentally it refers to the nature of reality. So that's probably the best way to think of it. And it's one of the three, as you know, allegedly death bardos or gaps. Bardo is a Tibetan word that means transitional process or gap. So it refers to that really magical point in the death trajectory where, according to the Tibetans and other actually non-dual traditions, one returns to the nature of reality.
So, do you have to be a Buddhist to experience the Bardo? Like, what happens if I'm a Christian or a Muslim?
Yeah, yeah. Well, this is a good question. So, the traditions talk about the difference between surface structures and deep structures. And so when we're talking about the Dharmata, we're talking about a deep structure. We're talking about arguably the irreducible trans-cultural, in other words, not limited to different cultures and that sort of thing, dimension of completely stripped down naked reality. But then on top of that are laden all these kind of surface structures, and that's where the different cultural interpretations come into play, the Christian, Muslim, and et cetera. And so therefore, here's the kicker. Everybody does in fact experience the Dharmata, but the question is one of recognition. And it's a little bit like a bit of a pop quiz that actually happens every night. So for instance, when we fall into deep dreamless sleep, according to many of the non-dual traditions, that's a nighttime concordant experience of actually the Dharmata. And so therefore we can ask ourselves, geez, how many of us maintain lucidity or awareness and actually recognize deep dreamless sleep? The vast majority of people don't. In fact, they go, what do you mean? You can be a lucid and awake and deep dreamless sleep? How's that even possible? Well, for people who are really familiar with that extremely subtle dimension of mind, that's what lucid sleep is about, where you actually enter this domain of awareness with complete awareness and lucidity. And so therefore, what the traditions maintain is, again, we'll all experience it. The issue is one, will we recognize it? Without preparation, we won't recognize it. We just skip right over, wake up into the next day in the same way that the tradition says you're going to wake up into your next life. And so with that said, however, as you're going in and coming out of that reality, then no, a Christian will not experience it the same way. A Hindu, a Buddhist will not experience the surface structures in the same way. And so therefore, when one strips all that enculturation away, then you get to really what the traditions refer to as naked mind and reality. And that's something that's arguably the core transcultural dimension that we all return to, irrespective of your background, your religion, and whatnot. And so this is another reason why this particular Bardo is so extraordinarily subtle. It's why we miss it. You know, the gross kind of surface-oriented egoic mind is not familiar with this formless dimension of itself. It's not, we don't associate with formless awareness. We associate with the forms that arise in awareness. We associate with things, with thoughts, with emotions, with some kind of form or content. And one of the characteristics of the Dharmata is its formless nature. And that's why we miss it, because we're simply not familiar with that dimension spectrum of who we really are.
So it's almost as though nothing's really there because it
Well, that's
doesn't it doesn't appear in our understanding the way we perceive.
it doesn't appear in our shrink-wrapped conceptual versions. And so this is an important topic as well. It's not nothing that's there, but no thing. So awareness of absence is not absence of awareness. There is formless awareness that's there. So it's not nothing, which would be nihilistic. It's no thing. And because, again, we don't identify with no thingness. Ego is the archetype of the thing. And so when those superficial egoic dimensions are stripped away, and that is exactly what takes place in the death journey. That's what death is. It's the non-negotiable, uncompromising, kind of forceful release of all these cultural trappings, so to speak, all the things in various dimensions of that obscure this fundamental nature. And so if we don't identify with our nature as being, in fact, no thingness, then again, another reason we skip it. But here's the really good news. You totally can recognize this. There are absolutely practices, and this is a lot of what we'll be doing in the program. There are absolutely positively practices that are designed to match the subtlety of the mind that you experience at this moment of death and beyond. Now, when you're alive in your meditation. And these are, of course, the really marvelous formless meditations. And again, more good news, formless means deathless. And so when we talk about the Dharmata, we're talking about returning to who we really are, which is the dimension of our being that does not grow old, get sick, or die. This is it's called the changeless nature, the part of you that doesn't get Alzheimer's, dementia, Parkinson, AIDS, or whatever. This is the part of you that really is indestructible. And so, wow, this sounds good, but like, okay, how do I access this? What does it really mean to me? Well, you absolutely positively can access it. And it's an absolute game changer when you do. What does it mean to you? It can remove all your fear of death. Because as my dear friend David Loy says beautifully, the nature of this path is to discover that part of you which cannot die because it was never born. And that's this deathless nature. And it's available to us not only in the bardo at the end of life, according to the Tibetans, it's available to us in the bardo, the gap, every night when we fall into deep dreamless sleep. That's a similitude experience of that. But even more intimately, if you're aware of it, that little micro gap, that little micro bardo between each and every thought. And this is where it gets really cool and really applicable, because if you can simply become aware of that space between thoughts, the space between mental content, that's your ticket into the Dharmata, because that's the way the Dharmata manifests moment to moment to moment. And that's what we do with this program is we use kind of the archetype, the death principle, as its mostly manifest in this heightened way at the moment of death. We use those principles to work our way back to how these teachings and processes take place moment to moment, day to day. And therefore, we realize the utter immediacy and practicality. It can seem at first that, wow, these Bardo teachings are really esoteric. Well, no, not really. They're highly exoteric. They may seem esoteric only because we haven't experienced them and recognized them fully. And so that's part of my charter, is to introduce this terrain at the level of a map. Say, here's these amazing teachings, not just from Buddhism, but from all the other non-dual traditions, non-dual Shaiva Tantra and the other wisdom traditions. And then take that fundamental narrative, implement it through the practices, the meditations that allow you to bring that map into your territory, into your experience. And then really, I think most importantly, is realize, whoa, these principles are happening all the time. I can use these teachings to help me deal with the end of a relationship, the end of a job. Anything that ends abides by these fundamental principles. And that's really important, because this becomes then really super practical stuff. And therefore, it's like a twofer, even a threefer. You're getting so much more than really meets the outbound eye. Yes, you're preparing for death. Yes, you're preparing for lucidity in the sleep arena. And we work a lot with the nocturnal meditations, dream yoga, and sleep yoga. But then the threefer is these teachings then work also to help us maintain lucidity and awareness in the midst of everyday life.
Wow, not only practical, but also very universal. I mean, we all have things that end and, transitions that we go through.
That's the other really great thing that happens here. It really it reveals the kind of universality, the Catholicity of the human condition. That's a really great gift around these teachings, is we all, during our varied surface structured lives, I'm not the same as you, your storyline is different than mine, as it is with the 7+ billion people on this planet. But it's very interesting, you go to an ER, a hospital, and when everybody dies, everybody flatlines. Everybody returns to this fundamental baseline of being that we all share, not just with the human condition, but according to these teachings, with all sentient life forms. So this is a wonderful way to realize the commonality of all forms of life, the animal kingdom, the human kingdom. And therefore, these teachings really, for me, one of the great benefits is they show how much what I learned about myself applies to others. And this becomes really practical and helpful when you're with others that are dying. I work a fair amount in the death and dying community. And because of my confidence born with these teachings and then the practices that implement them, it really creates this kind of stability, confidence, this unflappability, where you can enter really difficult situations, like when someone is dying. And because you realize deeply in your experience that, yeah, I may not know exactly what the surface structure of this person is going through, but I know where they're going. I know what's actually happening to their heart and their mind. And therefore, that kind of confidence becomes really contagious, and it actually permeates the environment. It can help the person who's dying tremendously. It can help caretakers, because you develop this kind of fearlessness. Fear is born from ignorance. We're always afraid of what we don't know. And I think what Marie Curie said once beautifully: nothing in life is to be feared, it's only to be understood. That's a beautiful statement. And so the reason we fear endings, transitions, and the big one, the reason we fear death is because we don't know. We're afraid of the dark. And so these teachings are brilliant illuminators that way, that they really point out in extraordinarily sophisticated, elegant ways the condition that we all return to. And that, again, it's not just something mere kind of spiritual rhetoric. You can experience these sorts of things in your practices. And that's where the confidence is really born, when you really have these experiences in your life now and you realize, whoa, I get this. And therefore you transform in this kind of tantric or alchemical way, arguably the greatest obstacle in life, which is the end of it, right? You transform that obstacle into a tremendous opportunity. And so I playfully say, literally armed with these teachings, death becomes a once in a lifetime opportunity, right? And so what a game changer this is, right? Instead of all this trepidation and fear and anxiety, all born from not knowing, ignorance, now it's like, whoa, that is replaced with anticipation. And that's why they say the great practitioners, the great yogis, actually look forward to the end of life, not in a weird kind of suicidal way, not at all, but as a way that to understand that they have this tremendous opportunity when the fluidity of the mind is released from the limitations of the body. And that if we can kind of ride and float the current of this fluidity, whoa, that's a big deal. That's a game changer. Then we really can have control over what previously had total control over us. That's no small thing.
Well, that reminds me, isn't there, what is it with the deities that Tibetans say appear in the Bardo? Is that a universal thing, or is that something that's a cultural?
Oh, yeah, the deities. Yeah, we're going to meet all 100 of them. Actually, yeah, that's a great question, Dee. So the Tibetans talk about, especially in the very famous Tibetan Book of the Dead, the 100 peaceful and wrathful deities that allegedly occur there. And these deities deities are code language for purity, or for, in this case, the archetypal expressions of the awakened mind. And so every one of these deities is like deity principle. What does the deity actually represent? And so will we meet as Westerners, even Westerners studying Tibetan Buddhism, will we meet these in exactly this kind of depicted iconographical form that the Tibetans assert? No, not at all. The deities will represent themselves in various ways, depending on our particular inklings and predispositions. And therefore, really, when we come to understand the deity principle, and that's the other thing that we really explore a lot, is how do we meet these deities in daily life? What does it mean to meet the deity? And even better, what does it mean to become the deity? And so this is another part of this kind of cultural translation work that I sometimes consider myself doing, translating these teachings from an ancient Eastern culture into a modern Western one, is that we'll be working with the deity principle in terms of understanding the energetics behind our emotions. And this, again, is where it becomes really practical, because when you're dealing with emotional energies, kind of the electricity of life, those are the deities and drags, so to speak. And so by understanding a more refined relationship to our anger, to our passion, aggression, pride, jealousy, whatever, we realize, and the meditations are given that allow you to do that. Whoa, if I relate to my anger properly, this isn't just anger. This is the deity Akshobhya. This is this incredible, incisive brilliance and clarity of the mind that only just gets obscured in life because I don't understand that energetic. And so again, that's pretty darn practical. Next time you get swept up in some big emotional upheaval, again, in this kind of tantric alchemical way, transform lead into gold. You can realize that deeply within these energetics lies the deity principle. And so this is really, it's kind of the fun thing that I do with this stuff. It's like, a little bit like decoding, right? There's all this code language and hacking that's going on here. And so I come in as a kind of a dream, I wouldn't say dream translator, as a cultural translator, and I give people the access codes. How can we hack into these teachings to really understand their genius and how they apply now? And that's actually what brings them additional impact and import, because when you have to do just a little bit of work, it's a little bit like dream interpretation, where sometimes you have to wrestle a little bit with some of these principles in the dream. What does it really mean? What does it really mean? And then all of a sudden, when you get what it really means, then it has a lot more impact. And so therefore, one of the things that we engage in, kind of like what we're doing here, but more specifically with the practices, is allow us to decode things like the deity principle, the Bardo principle, the death principle, and realize, whoa, there's a lot of not only real profundity here, but practicality. And that really is probably the take-home message, is that this stuff has tremendous immediacy and practicality, applicability to everything we do. And so I've been studying this stuff for decades, and it never ceases to amaze me. It's like, whoa, this is what they're talking about. So like the Tibetan Book of the Dead is just as much a book of living. It's really about how to bring these incredibly profound teachings, exploring these really subtle dimensions of our mind and heart, dimensions that are actually revealed when we die. That's what happens, is this kind of forceful introduction to these archetypal aspects of our being, and then bring them into life and saying, wow, these teachings apply to absolutely everything I do here. I think that's kind of cool.
Very cool. And I can't wait for this program this summer in August at Jala Mountain Center. And thank you for sharing a little bit about this program itself. And thank you in general for your teaching.
Yeah, thanks, Dee. I appreciate it. Thanks for the opportunity. As you can tell, I get really jazzed about this stuff because I know how much is tucked in here. And I can speak from my own experience how revolutionary these teachings and practices have been in transforming not only my relationship to the end of life, but my relationship to life altogether. So it's a real honor and delight for me, especially at DMC, to share these practices, because it's such a deep passion for mine. So I really appreciate the opportunity.